What people really faced after a family death, the forgotten hidden period of the Middle Ages. Have you ever felt the air in a room grow heavy, not with dust but with the weight of a gauze you cannot see? Is it possible that the walls of an ancient home do not merely shield us from the wind, but actually inhale the sorrow of those who perished within them? Why does the silence of a deep forest feel less like peace and more like a held breath? Can a bloodline become so tangled that it no longer carries life, but serves as a tether for something much older and hungrier? And if you were to look into the shadows of your own lineage, would you recognize the face staring back, or would its distortion scream of secrets better left buried? You have been taught that history is a sequence of dates and crowns, a linear path of progress and light, yet the reality of the forgotten corners of the American wilderness, where the Middle Ages did not end but festered in isolation, tells a story of shadows. We are about to peel back the skin of a reality you thought you understood. Beyond the superficial curiosity of ghost stories lies a physical and spiritual architecture of suffering that most dare not acknowledge. By the time our journey through this damp, rotting corridor of time concludes, you will not only understand the mechanics of this hidden period, you will feel the cold dampness of it against your own skin. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a clearing in the Appalachian foothills, where the mist does not rise, but seems to leak from the very soil. The year is not a number, but a feeling of perpetual autumn. The structures here are not built to last, but to hard-low-slung cabins of rough-hewn timber, stained black by rain and the smoke of fires that never quite warm the bones. The wood is slick to the touch, covered in a fine layer of moss that feels like velvet over a tombstone. As you step forward, the ground beneath your boots is soft, yielding, smelling of leaf mold and something metallic, like old coins or dried iron. This is the realm of the Blackwood family, a name whispered only when the wind is high enough to drown the sound. They are the guardians of a genetic and spiritual decay that has remained untouched for generations. Within the flickering orange glow of a dying hearth, you see the first of them. He is not a monster of legend, but a man of tragic, warped geometry. His spine curves in a way that defies the natural grace of the human form, his shoulder rising toward his ear, as if he is forever bracing for a blow that never lands. His skin is the color of parchment left in a cellar translucent, revealing the blue, pulsing roadmap of veins that struggle to pump life through a body twisted by the very blood it shares with its kin. The atmosphere here is thick, a physical presence that fills your lungs with the scent of wet wool and stagnant water. There is a rhythm to the house, a slow, labored thumping that you eventually realize is not the wind against the shutters, but the heartbeat of the structure itself. The light is filtered through windows of greased animal hide, casting a jaundiced, sickly yellow hue over everything. It obscures the corners, leaving the eye to wonder if the movement in the periphery is a trick of the flame, or the shifting of limbs that do not belong to the living. You see the father, his face a landscape of asymmetrical ridges. One eye permanently clouded and fixed toward the ceiling, while the other darts with a frantic, animalistic intelligence. He moves with a heavy, dragging gait, the sound of his feet on the uneven floorboards producing a dissonant scrape that echoes through the hollow walls. Every movement is a testament to the fragility of a body turned against itself, a biological prison built from centuries of isolation and the refusal to let the outside world in. It was essential, this seclusion. For them, the outside world was a source of infection, while the rot they lived in felt like the only true safety. But safety has a price, and here, the price is the gradual dissolution of the human image. You are not merely watching a family. You are witnessing the manifestation of a curse that acts through the physical world. The silence is broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire and a low, guttural humming that seems to come from the cellar below. It is a vibration that you feel in your teeth, a frequency of dread that signals the presence of something that does not require a name to be feared. The stability of their existence is anchored in this misery, a paradox where the more they suffer, the more they belong to this soil. As the shadow of the evening deepens, the boundary between the wood of the house and the flesh of the inhabitants begins to blur. You feel the urgency to turn back, to find the path that led you here. But the mist has swallowed the trail, leaving you as an observer in a theater of the grotesque. This is the beginning of the understanding you were promised, the realization that the most terrifying things are not found in the void, but in the distorted reflection of our own humanity. Make sure you are already subscribed to this channel, as we will descend even deeper into the roots of this corrupted family tree, exploring the secrets that the light of day never dared to touch and that only true seekers of dark, historical truth have the courage to face. The air inside the dwelling is not merely cold, it's stagnant, carrying the density of a place where the ventilation has long since been choked by the growth of black mold and the accumulation of heavy, forgotten breaths. You notice that the walls are sweating, beads of moisture tracing slow paths through the soot-covered timber like tears on a scorched face. It is here, in the dim light of a flickering tallow candle, that the second figure emerges from the gloom. This is the mother, a woman whose form has been surrendered to a structural collapse of the skeletal frame. Her neck is elongated and tilted at an unnatural angle, forcing her to look at the world's sides, as if she is perpetually peering around a corner that does not exist. Her fingers are long, fused at the joints, resembling the gnarled roots of the hemlock trees that surround the cabin. When she moves, the sound is not of fabric, but of dry parchment rubbing together, the sound of skin that has lost its elasticity and become a brittle shell. You watch as she attempts to stir a heavy iron pot over the fire, her movements slow and agonizingly deliberate. Each pulse of the flame reveals the deep hollows of her cheeks and the way her jaw hangs slightly slack, unable to fully close due to the misalignment of bone. This is the forgotten reality of the hidden Middle Ages in the American wilderness, a period where the lack of new life meant the recycling of the old, until the mold was broken and distorted. The sensory experience of this room is overwhelming. The smell of rancid fat mingles with the metallic tongue of the damp earth floor, creating a scent that feels like it is coating the back of your throat. You begin to understand the functional necessity of their deformities. In this isolate your help, Nuhuan Tundashil. They became their own tools, their bodies adapting to the labor of survival in ways that look horrific to the outsider, but were the only path to endurance. The father's distorted shoulder allows him to carry massive logs that a symmetrical man would find unwieldy. The mother's tilted gauze allows her to scan the floor for the small, scurrying things they must catch to supplement their meager diet. There is a terrifying efficiency to their brokenness. It is a biological survival mechanism that has stripped away beauty and replaced it with a raw, jagged utility. The darkness in the corners of the room seems to pulse in time with their labored breathing, a rhythmic expansion and contraction that suggests the house itself is a living lung, inhaling the vitality of those trapped within its embrace. As you stand there, an uninvited guest in this sanctuary of the grotesque, you feel a sudden, sharp drop in temperature. It is a localized chill, a spear of ice that pierces through the heavy humidity of the room. The mother stops her stirring. The father, seated on a stump in the corner, freezes his rhythmic swaying. Both of them turn their distorted gazes toward the staircase, a ladder of rotted rungs, leading to the loft above. There is a sound. It is not a footstep, for it lacks the weight of flesh and bone. It is a wet, sliding sound, like something heavy and damp being dragged across the floorboards. Everything is connected by the blood. A voice seems to whisper, although no lips have moved. You realize then that the terror of this environment is not just in what you can see, but in what remains partially revealed. The shadows under the table seem to stretch toward your feet, reaching out with thin, smoky fingers. The stability of their isolated life is a thin veil, a fragile crust over an abyss of ancestral trauma that is now manifesting as a physical presence. They have lived with this shadow for so long that they no longer fear it. They simply wait for it, as one waits for the tide to come in and swallow the shore. The contrast here is stark. Outside, the world may be moving toward enlightenment, but inside these walls, time has folded in on itself. There is an abundance of shadow and a crushing scarcity of hope. Every board on the floor, every stone in the chimney, is a testament to a refusal to change, a commitment to the preservation of a lineage that should have ended centuries ago. The atmosphere is so thick now that you can almost taste the dust of disintegrated bones. You feel the presence of the third member of the family, still unseen in the loft above, whose breathing is a wet, whistling rasp that sets your nerves on fire. The horror is not a sudden shock. It is a slow realization that you are standing in a tomb that refuses to be sealed. You are witnessing the ultimate consequence of a bloodline that turned inward until it became a knot that cannot be untied. If you can feel the weight of this ancestral burden, if you can hear the scratching inside the walls that defies explanation, then you are beginning to truly see. Comment the phrase, "The blood remembers what the mind tries to forget." Say it, feel the vibration of the words, and realize that in this house, the blood is the only thing that never sleeps. It is the architect of the walls and the jailer of the souls within. The atmosphere within the cabin begins to curl, moving from a heavy stillness into a state of active, vibrating dread. You notice that the shadows do not behave according to the laws of the flickering hearth. They stretch and retract with a predatory autonomy, pooling around the base of the furniture like spilled ink. The rhythmic whistling from the loft above grows more irregular, a jagged sound that shears through the silence like a rusted blade. This is where the third presence resides, the oldest son, a figure whose very existence is a violation of the natural order. He doesn't walk. He crawls, his limbs elongated and multi-jointed, a result of the skeletal architecture collapsing and rebuilding itself over decades of secluded growth. His skin is not merely pale. It is gray, the color of ash and wet stone, stretched so tightly over its protruding ribs that it appears translucent. As he begins his descent down the rotted ladder, the wood groans under a weight that feels far greater than his emaciated frame should allow. You see his hands first long, spindly digits with nails that have thickened into black. Hooked claws, scraping against the timber with a sound that vibrates in the marrow of your own bones. The sensory immersion becomes a suffocating shroud. You can feel the grease from the air settling on your skin, a slick film that smells of old copper and funeral lily. The temperature in the room continues to fluctuate wildly. A wave of heat from the dying fire, followed immediately by a draft so cold it smells of frozen earth and ancient, unwashed fabric. The physical reality of the Middle Ages, preserved here in this American pocket of rot, was never about the grandeur of knights. It was about the crushing weight of the soil and the biological despair of those who could not escape it. The sun reaches the floor, moving with a fluid, insectoid grace that is deeply disturbing to witness. His head is disproportionately large, his jaw misaligned so that his teeth, yellowed and sharp, are permanently exposed in a grimace of perpetual agony. He does not look at you, for his eyes are overgrown with a milky film, yet he senses your heat, your pulse, your fear. He moves toward the center of the room, his presence domesticating the terror, making the horrific seem mundane through the sheer persistence of his suffering. You begin to understand the structural function of this nightmare. The family operates as a single organism, a closed loop of trauma and biology. They are the guardians of a threshold. The father provides the raw strength of the warped frame. The mother provides the twisted vigilance of the sideways gaze. And the son, the most distorted of all, provides the bridge to the ancestors who refuse to leave. Every groan of the house is an echo of a voice that died 200 years ago. The walls are lined with charms, bundles of hair, teeth, and dried herbs tucked into the chinks between the logs meant to keep the outside world out. But they have functioned instead to trap the darkness in. The abundance of their misery is the only thing that provides them with security. No one from the world of light would ever cross this threshold. This is the ultimate isolation, a fortress built of deformities and reinforced by the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken sins. The fragility of their lives is balanced against the ironclad stability of their curse. They cannot leave, and the world cannot enter. As the sun settles into the shadows near the hearth, the fire lets out a final, violent pop, throwing a spray of sparks into the air. In that brief, brilliant flash, you see that the shadows on the wall do not match the people in the room. There are dozens of them shimmering, dark silhouettes of figures with the same curved spines and tilted heads, standing in a circle around you. They are the blood echoes, the remnants of everyone who has ever died in this room, bound to the lineage by the sheer density of the shared genetic material. The air grows so thick it feels like treading through water. You realize that the death mentioned in the title of our journey was not an end, but an initiation into this eternal, distorted choir. The terror is not that they are different from us, but that they are what remains when humanity is stripped of everything but its will to persist in the dark. It is time to acknowledge the weight of what you are seeing, to feel the pull of the earth that demands everything to return to it. Like the video, and give a like to this narrative if you can feel the cold grip of the Blackwood legacy tightening around the room. For the next layer of this descent will require every ounce of your resolve as we explore the very basement of their souls. The floorboards beneath your feet do not merely creak. They exhale, releasing a trapped, subterranean odor of wet lime and mineral salt. You are now standing at the very center of the Blackwood sanctuary, where the light of the hearth has retreated into a dull, pulsing ember that barely illuminates the grime on the walls. The air has become a physical weight, pressing against your chest with the density of a deep-sea current. It is in this profound gloom that the true nature of the house begins to reveal itself. You notice that the shadows in the corners are no longer stationary. They have begun to climb, moving upward along the timber beams, like a slow-moving liquid blurring the boundaries between the floor and the ceiling. The three figures, the father, the mother, and the son, have formed a loose triangle around the dying heat, their distorted silhouettes merging into a single, jagged outline that resembles a crown of thorns cast against the soot. The whistling from the son's throat has evolved into a rhythmic clicking, a sound like dry bones being shuffled in a leather bag, signaling that the barrier between the physical and the unseen has finally worn thin. You feel a sudden, violent vibration through the solace of your boots. It is coming from the cellar, a space that was never intended for storage, but as a route for the family's spiritual entrapment. The sound is a low, tectonic grind, as if the very foundations of the house are being repositioned by unseen hands. This is the structural reality of the forgotten Middle Ages, a world where the architecture was not just a shelter, but a ritualistic vessel designed to contain the rot of a dying lineage. You are pulled by an invisible tether toward the trapdoor in the corner. Its wood swollen and damp, weeping a dark resin that looks like congealed blood. As you lean closer, the sounds from below become distinct, the sound of many voices whispering in a language that predates the colonization of this land. A cacophony of sibilant tones that vibrate against your eardrums until your vision blurs. The abundance of the darkness here is so absolute that it feels luminous. A black sun radiating a cold, soul-sucking energy that demands your total submission. The contrast between the safety you once knew and the risk of this moment is now a yawning chasm. You see the father reach out a gnarled, trembling hand toward the air in front of him, his fingers closing around nothingness as if he is grasping the hand of a ghost. His clouded eye begins to weep a thick, gray fluid, and for the first time you see a look of profound, ecstatic terror on his face. He is not suffering. He is communicating. The deformities that seemed like a curse are actually the antennae of this family. The physical adaptations required to tune into the frequency of the void they have inhabited for centuries. Every curve of the spine, every fused joint, was a necessary adjustment to carry the weight of the entities that share their blood. The fragility of their human forms is the only thing allowing the stability of the supernatural presence to harden. If they were whole, they would shatter under the pressure of the spirits. Because they are broken, they can bend without snapping. The realization hits you like a physical blow. The family death was never the tragedy. The tragedy was the refusal to stay dead. The house is filled with those who have passed, but were pulled back into the weave of the family's distorted flesh. You feel a cold breath against the back of your neck, a sensation of icy needles skipping across your skin. And you realize that one of the shadow figures has detached itself from the wall and is standing directly behind you. You cannot turn. Your muscles are locked in the stasis of the room's overwhelming atmospheric pressure. This is the moment where the concrete world dissolves completely into the symbolic. The Blackwoods are not just a family. They are a monument to the endurance of pain, a living testament to what happens when a society abandons its most vulnerable to the hunger of the earth. Share this video now with someone who thinks they understand the darkness. For we are about to descend into the final, most harrowing revelation of the Blackwood bloodline, where the line between the observer and the observed is erased forever. The descent does not require movement, for the basement of the soul is a state of being that rises to meet you. As the fire finally surrenders to the encroaching dark, the charcoal remains of the hearth glow with a sinister, violet intensity, casting long, needle-like shadows that seem to pierce the very fabric I see of the room. You find yourself standing before the open maw of the cellar, the trapdoor having groaned upward on its rusted hinges without a single hand touching it. The smell that billows from the depths is no longer merely the scent of earth. It is the smell of ancient, recycled breath, the air of a tomb that has been opened and closed 1,000 times. The sun, with his multi-jointed limbs and translucent skin, begins to pull himself toward the opening, his movement fluid and terrifyingly silent. He does not use the stairs. He clings to the joists of the floor like a pale, bloated spider, his white eyes fixed on the darkness below as if he is seeing a banquet prepared in his honor. You feel the temperature drop to a point where your own breath crystallizes in the air, falling like tiny, frozen shards of glass onto the rotting wood. This is the functional core of the Blackwood existence, the point where the physical deformity meets the spiritual mandate. You observe the mother and father as they kneel at the edge of the abyss, their distorted bodies silhouetted against the faint, subterranean light that begins to leak from the hole. This light is not yellow or white. It is a pale, sickly green, the color of phosphorescent decay found on the underside of fallen trees. As you peer into the darkness, you see that the cellar is not a room for storage, but a living tapestry of bone and root. The walls of the pit are lined with the skeletal remains of those who came before, but they are not laid to rest. They are woven into the very structure of the foundation, their ribs acting as rafters, their skulls pressed into the dirt to form a mosaic of ancestral witnesses. The stability of the house above is literally built upon the density of the dead below. This was the secret of the hidden Middle Ages in these isolated pockets, the realization that to survive a world that wanted you dead, you had to make a pact with death itself. The sensory overload reaches a peak as a low, choral vibration begins to emanate from the pit. It is a sound of 100 throats humming a single, dissonant note that rattles your ribcage and makes your teeth ache. You realize that the deformities of the 3 living members are not random mutations, but purposeful reflections of the geometry of this basement. The father's carved spine mimics the arch of the cellar ceiling. The mother's tilted neck matches the angle of the roots that pierces the walls. The son's elongated limbs are a mirror to the spindly reach of the shadows that dwell in the deepest corners. They are the physical manifestations of this environment, sculpted by the pressure of the void. There is no escape because there is no self left to save. They have become the house, and the house has become them. The abundance of their suffering is the fuel for this eternal, static flame of existence. It is a closed system of agony, a perpetual motion machine of trauma that feeds on its own history. Now, the elevation begins. You are no longer just a spectator. You are a witness to the profound, terrifying resilience of the human spirit when it is pushed into the dark. We often speak of legacy as something bright, a light passed from one generation to the next, but the Blackwoods show us the shadow side of that coin. Legacy can also be a weight, a deformity of the soul that is passed down with the same certainty as the color of one's eyes. As the sun disappears into the green-lit moor of the cellar, and the mother and father turn their hollow gazes toward you, the final truth becomes clear. The horror is not that they are monsters. The horror is that they are loyal. They have remained faithful to a bloodline that has done nothing but break them, proving that the need to belong is often more powerful than the need to be whole. You have followed this path through the damp, the dark, and the distorted. You have seen the forgotten period where death was not an end but a transformation. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, as we are about to seal this historical and sensorial record. And only those who remain attentive to the details of the soul can understand the final weight of this silence. If you've watched this far, it's because you like this case. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Enjoy this narrative so the shadows don't dissipate. Before the final revelation, and share this documentary with those who have the courage to look at what the world has chosen to forget. The silence is now absolute, and in it, the Blackwood blood finally finds its rest. Merging with the earth, the walls, and, now, with their own memory. The descent into the cellar is not a fall, but a slow immersion into a medium denser than air. A saturation of the senses where the very concept of oxygen feels, replaced by the musk of 1,000-year-old silt. You find yourself standing on the bottom step, which is not made of wood, but of a compacted mass of organic matter that yields under your weight with a wet, rhythmic crunch. The green phosphorescence you saw from above is more intense here, emanating from a thick fungus that covers the walls, pulsing with a slow, bioluminescent heartbeat. In this light, the three Threaves are no merely people. They are statues of flesh and bone integrated into the architecture of the underground. The sun is draped over a central pillar of earth, his long limbs entwined with the thick tree roots that have pierced the ceiling, while the father and mother stand at the periphery, their distorted shapes casting shadows that seem to have more substance than their own bodies. The clicking sound has ceased, replaced by a silence so absolute that you can hear the sound of your own blood rushing through your veins, a sound that feels dangerously loud in the sanctuary of the unspoken. The texture of the air here is like wet velvet, clinging to your throat and lungs, carrying the taste of iron and ancient cedar. You notice that the father's hand is resting on a protrusion in the wall that, upon closer inspection, is a human jawbone partially absorbed by the stone. This is the functional stability of the Blackwood legacy, a literal anchoring of the living to the dead to prevent the family from being swept away by the currents of time. In the world outside, the Middle Ages ended with the Renaissance, but here, the structural rigidity of that era's obsession with blood, soil, and the divine right of suffering has been preserved in a vacuum. Every deformity you have witnessed is a gear in a machine of survival that refuses to fail. The mother's tilted head is not a disability. It is the correct posture for listening to the whispers that rise from the floor. The father's twisted spine is the only shape capable of weathering the psychic pressure of the ceiling. They are perfectly adapted to a nightmare of their own making, a biological masterpiece of the grotesque. As the green light flares, you see a fourth shape beginning to coalesce in the center of the room. It is not a person, but a density of shadow, a gathering of the blood echoes into a singular, towering presence. This is the source of the clicking, the origin of the whistling rasp. It is the collective consciousness of the lineage, a force that demands the continuation of the cycle at any cost. You feel a wave of intense, freezing grief wash over you. A sorrow so old it has no name, rooted in the thousands of nights these people spent in the dark, choosing each other over the light. The abundance of their isolation has created a secondary reality, a pocket dimension where the laws of nature are subservient to the laws of the blood. You see the sun reach out toward the shadow, his clawed fingers passing through the darkness as if it were water, his face momentarily contorted in a look of such pure, ancestral recognition that your heart stutters in your chest. The risk is no longer to your body, but to your understanding of what it means to be human. The contrast between this subterranean tomb and the world of the living is now stark. Above, there are stars and wind. Here, there is only the weight of the earth and the memory of the dead. Yet, there is a strange, horrific beauty in this stability. The Blackwoods have achieved what few ever do. They have become unchangeable. They have built a kingdom out of their own brokenness, a fortress of deformity that the world can never conquer, because the world can never understand it. As the shadow presence begins to expand, filling the cellar with a cold, humming energy, you realize that the elevation of this story is not found in a happy ending, but in the terrifying depth of human loyalty to its own pain. If you can feel the pressure of the earth above you, if the green light of the cellar is burned into your mind, then you have become part of the record. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, for we are moving toward the final crystallization of the Blackwood truth, and the path back to the surface is narrowing with every second. Comment the phrase, "The earth never forgets its own." Let the words sink into the silence of this underground chamber, and acknowledge the power of a legacy that refuses to die. The green luminescence begins to throb with a feverish intensity, revealing that the walls are not merely covered in fungus, but are breathing in a synchronized, shallow cadence. You are no longer standing in a basement. You are standing inside a throat, a passage that leads deeper into the historical gullet of a forgotten America. The sun's body seems to dissolve at the edges, his gray skin merging with the phosphorescence until he is a ghost of muscle and bone suspended in the ether. The father and mother move toward him, their footsteps making no sound on the organic floor, their movements possessing a ritualistic grace that contradicts their structure-natural ruin. They are preparing for the feeding of the silence, a functional necessity of their existence, where the living surrender a portion of their vitality to maintain the ancestral shadow from consuming the house entirely. You feel the atmosphere tighten, a constriction of the space that makes the rough-hewn beams overhead seem to descend, narrowing the world until only this circle of distorted flesh remains. The sensory details shift from the damp and the cold to a dry, electric heat that smells of ozone and scorched hair. The whistling sound returns, but it is no longer coming from the sun. It is coming from the very wood of the structure, a high-pitched vibration that shatters the remaining tallow candles and leaves you in a world of pulsating emerald light. You see the mother reaching into the hollow of her own collarbone, withdrawing a small, jagged shard of blackstone, a relic passed down through the bloodline. A literal piece of the foundation of their original home in the old world. As she holds it aloft, the shadow presence in the center of the room begins to solidify, taking in the characteristics of all three of them simultaneously. It has the father's clouded eye, the mother's tilted jaw, and the son's multi-jointed reach. This is the total ancestor, the architectural blueprint of their misery. The stability of their lives depends on this moment of connection, where the abundance of their shared trauma is offered up as a sacrifice to the stability of the void. The contrast Between the safety of your observation and the danger of this ritual is now a razor's edge. You can feel the shadow presence reaching into your own mind, searching for a hook, a shared sorrow, a genetic echo that it can claim. The fragility of the human ego is laid bare in this cellar, exposed as a thin, flickering flame against a gale of ancestral memory. The Blackwoods do not resist. They lean into the darkness, their deformities acting as the keys that unlock this communion. To the outside world, they are a tragedy of biology. To the entities in this room, they are a triumph of endurance. You realize that the death in the title was not a singular event, but a continuous process of family that is always dying, yet never dead, held together by the gravity of their own distorted love. The structure of the narrative has led you here, to the very marrow of the bone, where the concrete reality of a rotting house meets the symbolic elevation of eternal suffering. As the ritual reaches its climax, the green light turns a violent, bruised purple, and the floor beneath you begins to liquefy, turning into a whirlpool of black bile and memory. You feel yourself sinking, the weight of the Blackwood history pulling at your ankles, demanding that you to become a joist in this house of shadows. The sun turns his head toward you, and for a fleeting second, the milky film over his eyes clears, revealing a depth of human loneliness so profound it threatens to stop your heart. He is not asking for help. He is offering a warning. Like this video, to signal your presence in this space. For the light is fading and the barrier between the viewer and the viewed is becoming dangerously thin. We are approaching the moment of the great stillness, where the physical and the spiritual will finally merge into a single, unchangeable truth, and only those who have witnessed the depth of the cellar can hope to find the stairs back to the sun. The whirlpool of shadow at your feet stabilizes into a surface that feels like cold, polished obsidian, yet it remains translucent, revealing the layers of faces pressed against the underside of the reality you occupy. You are now witnessing the architectural limit of the Blackwood legacy. The father, standing at the southern point of the cellar, begins to chant not in words, but in a series of percussive grunts and clicks that harmonize with the structural groans of the house above. This is the manual of their survival, a linguistic fossil of the Middle Ages preserved in the amber of their isolation. The mother's tilted neck begins to straighten, the bones popping with the sound of dry kindling, as if the psychic pressure of the ancestor presence is physically realigning her frame to serve as a conduit. You feel a sudden, sharp scent of ozone and wet fur, a sensory clash that signals the breakdown of the boundary between the animal and the spiritual. The stability of the room is no longer dependent on the wooden beams, but on the intensity of the family's shared focus. The sun suspends web of roots, begluitha internau heat, his translucent skin becoming a lantern for the darkness. You can see his heart beating a slow, heavy thud that echoes the rhythm of the house. This is the functional peak of the biological machine. He is the battery, the father is the frame, and the mother is the sensor. Together, they form a tripod of suffering that supports the weight of the entire lineage. The abundance of their deformities are revealed as a complex, interlocking system. Without the father's curve, the mother's tilt, and the son's reach, the energy of the cellar would scatter and destroy the structure. They are not victims of nature. They are the engineers of a supernatural equilibrium. The contrast between their physical fragility and their spiritual resilience is the ultimate revelation of this hidden period. They have turned their brokenness into a fortress of such density that even time cannot erode it. As you watch, the shadow presence in the center of the room begins to draw the heat from your own body. You feel the warmth leaving your fingertips, the blood in your veins slowing to a glacial crawl. The risk of remaining an observer is becoming a physical threat. To look upon the Blackwood truth is to be consumed by it. The walls of the cellar begin to weep a thick, black ichor that smells of ancient, sunless oceans. This is the blood of the earth, the substance that feeds the roots and keeps the house anchored to this specific patch of cursed soil. You realize that the stability of the world outside depends on families like this staying in the dark, acting as the anchors for the terrors we refuse to acknowledge. Share this video with those who are brave enough to face the weight of the past, for the Blackwoods are not an anomaly, they are the foundation. We are now entering the final ascent, where the physical house will fall away, leaving only the raw, pulsing heart of the legacy. The transition from the depths of the cellar back toward the sensory threshold of the upper floors is not a physical climb, but a psychological unraveling. As you ascend the rotted ladder, the green phosphorescence of the basement clings to your clothes like a damp, glowing film, a reminder that the subterranean world does not let go easily. You find yourself back in the main room, but the architecture has changed. The walls seem thinner, the timber more skeletal, as if the house has exhausted its material substance to feed the ritual below. The three figures remain below, their presence felt only as a vibration in the floorboards. A low-frequency hum that suggests the stability of the structure is now purely a matter of will. The sensory experience is now one of extreme thinning. The smell of the damp earth is replaced by a sharp, antiseptic cold that smells of high altitudes and ancient ice. You are witnessing the elevation of the Blackwood tragedy into a philosophical monument. This is the hidden meaning of the forgotten Middle Ages in this isolated pocket of the world. It was never about the preservation of life, but the preservation of the echo. You notice that the objects in the room, the iron pot, the stump, the greased hide windows are beginning to lose their color, turning a uniform shade of spectral gray. The functional reality of these objects has been superseded by their symbolic weight. The pot is no longer for cooking. It is a vessel for the shared salt of generations. The stump is not a seat. It is an altar to the endurance of the twisted spine. Every element of the Blackwood home is a letter in a word that spells out belonging in a language of pain. The contrast between the abundance of their history and the scarcity of their future is the final, crushing weight of the narrative. They have nowhere left to go because they have become the destiny itself. As you stand in the center of the fading room, you feel the presence of the Totawansishtor whizzing through the floor, a cold shadow that passes through you like a winter wind. It does not harm you. It simply acknowledges you as a temporary vessel for its story. The fragility of your own existence, compared to the ironclad permanence of this curse, is a humbling realization. The Blackwoods have achieved a form of immortality, although it is one that no sane person would ever covet. They have become the ghosts of their own lives, haunting the present with the unresolved trauma of the past. This is the true family death, the moment when the individual is entirely consumed by the lineage, leaving behind only a distorted shell to carry the name. The atmosphere is now so thin that you can hear the stars scraping against the sky outside, a crystalline sound that signals the end of the immersive journey. The final layer of understanding is now within your reach. You have seen how the concrete deformities of the flesh were the necessary foundations for a spiritual fortress. You have felt the texture of a reality that the modern world has spent centuries trying to bury. The Blackwoods are the mirror we refuse to look into, the reminder that the blood is a river that carries both the light and the silt of those who came before. Take a moment to reflect on the weight of what you have witnessed. If the air in your own room feels a little heavier now, if the shadows in your corners seem a little more attentive, it is because the story of the Blackwoods has found a place in your memory. We are moments away from the final silence, where the house will vanish and only the lesson will remain. Stay with me for the final transition, for the bridge back to the light is narrow, and the darkness is still reaching out. What people really faced after a family death, the forgotten hidden period of the Middle Ages. The words return now, not as a title, but as a final, resonant bell tolling in the silence of the Appalachian mist. You are standing outside the cabin now, watching as the structure begins to fold in on itself. The timber sighing as it surrenders to the gravity of the cellar. There is no fire, no scream, no dramatic collapse. There is only a slow, rhythmic sinking, as if the earth is finally closing its mouth over a secret it has held for too long. The father, the mother, and the son are gone, absorbed into the very soil that sculpted their distorted frames. The sensory world is returning to its natural state, the smell of pine needles, the sound of a distant owl, the cold, clean bite of the mountain air. Yet, the ground where the house stood remains black. A scorched patch of earth, where nothing will ever grow, a permanent scar on the face of the wilderness. The structural journey is complete. You have moved from the superficial curiosity of a title into the marrow of a biological and spiritual nightmare. You have seen how the isolation of a bloodline can turn the human form into a tool for ancestral survival, and how the hidden period was a time when the laws of the soul were written in the language of deformity. The elevation is now absolute. The Blackwoods are no longer a family, but a symbol of the terrifying endurance of human loyalty. They chose to be broken together rather than be whole apart. This is the final, haunting truth of our journey, that the most powerful force in the human experience is not love, nor hate, but the refusal to be forgotten. They built a kingdom in the dark, and although the house is gone, the frequency of their suffering remains. A low vibration in the earth that can be felt by anyone who knows how to listen. The contrast between the darkness you have left and the light you are returning to is a gift, but it is one that comes with a price. You can never truly unsee the green light of the cellar or unhear the clicking of the sun's joints. You are now a carrier of the Blackwood record, a witness to the forgotten Middle Ages that survived in the shadows of the New World. The stability of your own reality is a fragile thing, a thin crust over a deep and hungry history. As the mist swallows the clearing and the path back to the modern world opens before you, remember the faces of those who stayed behind. Remember the weight of the blood and the silence of the house. The journey has ended, but the echo remains, a cold breath against the back of your neck that whispers of secrets yet to be told. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, as stories like this, which challenge perception and touch the deepest roots of our being, are rare and require courage to be told. If you've watched this far, it's because you like this case. Leave a comment saying I've watched this far, so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Enjoy this conclusion to honor the memory of those whom time has tried to erase, and share this documentary, spreading the warning that the past is never truly dead. It is just waiting in the shadows to be remembered once again. The silence is now yours to carry.